The preliminary title report is a title company's roadmap to conveying clear title to a buyer and or a lender. It lists all the issues that'll have to be addressed in order for the transaction to properly close. If there's going to be a problem with title on a deal, the prelim is usually where you'll first catch wind of it. Some items on there can really mess up a transaction, and some look like they might, but actually don't end up being that big of an issue. I'm Will Gray, and I'm your tour guide through the preliminary report on today's episode of the Title Insurance Experience. Most of the items that we'll look at today come in the section of the preliminary report listed as exceptions to coverage, sometimes called Schedule B of the preliminary report. But before we get to that, we're going to take a quick look at the vesting, which you'll see before you get to the exceptions. It's simply a statement of how title is currently held and by whom. Not a red flag usually, unless it's something different than what you expect. We'll need all of the vested owners to join in on any transaction. Also watch out for any ambiguity. If the vesting is followed by a phrase beginning with subject to, and it refers to a few other items in the preliminary report, pay careful attention to those items. This could be an indication of some potential issues on the transaction. We'll now move on to exceptions to coverage, which technically means a lot what it sounds like. It means we as a title company aren't going to protect the insured party against these issues. So they'll either have to accept these issues as they stand, which is frequently the case for easements, CC&Rs, which are covenants, conditions, and restrictions. These items are meant to run with the property. Other items, such as liens, deeds of trust, etc., will need to be removed through the escrow process before the deal can actually close. We'll check out these items more or less in the order they tend to appear in the preliminary report. So first, let's take a look at property taxes. Property taxes are often listed toward the very top of the section on exceptions to coverage, and the report will show the current payment status of the property taxes. Don't let unpaid next to any of the installments scare you. Usually if a payment is actually delinquent, the title company will list it as delinquent instead of just unpaid on the report. The payment may not actually be due yet. Under here usually is where you might also find that the property has been declared tax defaulted for previous year's property taxes. Any past due property taxes will need to be paid before the transaction can close. Often you'll find easements listed on the preliminary report. These are not necessarily red flags. An easement is the right of another party to use a part of your property for a specific purpose. Most of them tend to be non-invasive. A very common one is an easement towards the very edge of a property on one side or another for a utility company to maintain their fixtures. The existence of an easement is not in and of itself a red flag. Pay attention to where the easement lies and what purpose the easement is for. If either of these raise objections to the buyer, now is the time to confront that and see if it's worth continuing with the transaction. If you're not sure about exactly where on the property an easement lies or how it might affect your use of the property, you can request plotted easements from the title company, in which the area affected by the easement will be highlighted on a map of the property. Another exception that can show up in preliminary reports and often looks pretty scary is the lack of right of vehicular access. And if you're a home buyer, this is a spooky thing to see on your preliminary report. I've seen it a few times, but I've never actually seen it where it is a red flag. It's important to read through the exception and see to which street there is a lack of right of vehicular access. If it's not the street that the driveway to the property goes to, then it's not a problem. Usually when I've seen this is situations where, for instance, the backyard to a property is adjacent to a major street. All this exception means is that the new buyer won't have a right to have a driveway go out onto that major street from their backyard. Obviously, if there's a lack of right to vehicular access from any street and the buyer would like to keep a vehicle on their property, this can be a pretty major problem. Next, we'll check out the deeds of trust. Usually in California, a deed of trust secures a mortgage note against a property, though it can secure other debts or obligations. A deed of trust is by no means a red flag for the transaction. Most of the properties that we deal with in residential resale and refinance transactions have at least one deed of trust. If there are more deeds of trust on the prelim than loans that the owner believes they have, this definitely calls for investigation, and like I've mentioned, the sooner the better, with the important exception that a reverse mortgage is secured by two deeds of trust. One of the most common unexpected deed of trust scenarios is a deed of trust securing a home equity line of credit with a zero balance. Simply paying off these loans does not automatically result in the deed of trust being released from the property. Usually when this becomes a problem is when the beneficiary or lien holder has gone out of business or is otherwise difficult to get in touch with. So the sooner it's brought to the attention of escrow, the better, so they can start tracking down the lien holder to get a zero demand or a release from title. Another potential red flag in deeds of trust is a deed of trust from a previous owner, an unreleased senior deed of trust. If you find one of these, bring it to the attention of title and escrow right away, because once again, time is of the essence when dealing with these kinds of issues. There are a wide variety of different liens that can attach to a property and show up on the prelim, and all of them will need to be addressed in order for a transaction to close. Some liens, such as federal or state tax liens, are what we call general liens. The other type of lien is a specific lien, such as a mechanic's lien, which attaches directly to a property. If you see a general lien, one of the first things to do, which you should be doing promptly anyway, is to fill out and return the statement of information, because the general lien attaches to an individual. And usually when we start these prelims, the only thing we have to go by when identifying general liens is the owner name. So there's a possibility in most cases that one of these general liens actually belongs to someone else with the same name and will be removed from the prelim upon receipt of the statement of information. Any liens that do actually end up attaching to the property after receiving the SI will need to be paid off at close. And once again, time plays an important factor. The more time escrow has to get in touch with the lien holder and get a demand, the more comfortably the transaction can close. And if the owner needs to do any negotiating with the lien holder to accept a lower amount, obviously the more time to allow for this, the better for everyone. Judgments are another type of general lien that appear often on the preliminary report. Once again, their applicability to the property in question should be confirmed by the statement of information, and they will need to be paid off or cleared at close of escrow. The next big exception that we'll look at is the notice of lis pendens, or pending action, pendency of action. There's a few different names for it. All of them are bad news. This means that there is an active court case in which the ownership to the property is being challenged. While these things are on title, it is nearly impossible to close a transaction. Because how are we going to guarantee the act of someone selling a property or refinancing a property when their very ownership to the property is actively being challenged in court? If you notice one of these on your prelim, get in touch with your title team right away, but be prepared for the worst as far as this transaction goes. Next and finally, we will look at the requirement for an uninsured deed affidavit. The header for this item can differ on the prelim from company to company. It can be the effect of a deed or the requirement that we be furnished an affidavit from so-and-so to substantiate this transfer. All it really means is that there are one or more deeds along the chain of title that change ownership to the property, But that change of ownership was not insured by a title company. In order to preclude any kind of fraud and make absolutely sure that clean title is being conveyed to the buyer, the title company asked for a signed and notarized affidavit from the grantor in that transaction, confirming that it was their intent to transfer the property according to the terms of that deed. If there's going to be any difficulty getting in contact with these parties, or if any of these parties have passed away, get in touch with your title company to find out what, if any, other documentation they will accept to substantiate those transfers. It is important to note that this has not been a comprehensive list of the potential issues that can arise on a prelim. What we've covered are some of the most common items that lead to questions, issues, or in the worst case scenarios, even the death of deals. So next transaction, make sure first of all you order your title and therefore your prelim from WFG Title, and keep an eye out for these issues. I'll be happy to help you review your preliminary reports from any transaction, whether or not it's a WFG Title prelim. You can head to will4title.com/contact to snag my contact information, send over a copy, and I'll let you know what to watch out for. In the meantime, I hope this episode of the Title Insurance Experience has been helpful in demystifying these reports a little bit. Until then, this is WG from WFG saying thanks for watching.